Hi, welcome to Goal 7. This module is about muscle contraction. The objectives are to explain in detail the process of muscle contraction, explain the importance of myoglobin, creatine phosphate, and cellular respiration to the process of muscle contraction. So in general, the overall big picture here is that acetylcholine is released from the motor neuron. It binds the receptors on the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber and causes sodium to rush in. That entry of that positive ion causes depolarization of the muscle fiber, and calcium is released from the cisternae. As calcium comes out, it binds the troponin and tropomyosin and pulls it away from the actin. Once it's out of the way, the troponin and tropomyosin are out of the way, the myosin, and that's this red circular thing, attaches to the actin and pulls it, and that is the contraction. So overall, that's kind of what happens, and the next several slides are going to talk about each one of these steps in a little bit more detail. So what you need in order to have a muscle contraction is you need your motor neurons to work. The impulse has to come from the motor neuron. Polio, for example, damages the motor neurons, so your muscles are fine, but you can't contract them because you don't have that impulse. You need the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Very rarely will you find somebody that doesn't have acetylcholine or can't make it, but the disease myasthenia gravis, it isn't made as much, or it's an autoimmune disease that destroys the ability to have enough of it around. You need calcium. You get this from your diet, but your body balances the amount of calcium in your blood with parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. Remember, we talked about that during the bone section. So it's very important that you have the right amount of calcium. And people with screwed up calcium not only have trouble with muscle contraction, but there's other problems as well, including the impulse from the motor neuron requires calcium at the end. And you need energy. Energy is in the form of ATP, if you remember. That's what cells use for energy. And to get that, you need to break covalent bonds, so you pretty much need to eat. Okay? And if you're missing this stuff, you're not going to have muscle contraction. So the neuromuscular junction is where the neuron meets the muscle fiber. So a motor neuron meets the muscle fiber. You can see this right here. The motor neuron is in yellow, and the muscle fiber is the long tube-like thing along the bottom. And the neuromuscular junction is where they meet. There's a specialized region of the sarcolemma that has little indentations there. You can see where the motor neuron meets it, and that is called the motor end plate, where those two actually touch. So sometimes neuromuscular junction and motor end plate is used interchangeably, but the whole thing is the neuromuscular junction, and the motor end plate is right where the axon meets the muscle fiber. There's a little tiny space where neurotransmitters diffuse across. That's called the synaptic cleft. You can kind of see it a little bit bigger here. So at the end of the motor neuron, you have these little vesicles that contain the neurotransmitter, and the neurotransmitters, there's a bunch of different kinds, but the ones at motor neurons are always ACH, acetylcholine. They're in these vesicles, and when the impulse comes down, the vesicle merges with the membrane and opens and releases the neurotransmitter, and they diffuse across that synaptic cleft and bind receptors on the sarcolemma, the motor end plate. So here's a electron micrograph picture, skeletal muscles with individual neuromuscular junctions where the motor neurons meet the muscle fibers. Here's a cartoon of the motor neuron. The axon comes down. These little vesicles are filled with these little red circles. That's acetylcholine. Acetylcholine binds the receptor. You notice these little two hot dog shaped things. ACH binds that receptor, and when they're both bound, they open it, and it allows sodium to travel in. Sodium goes in, but acetylcholine does not. So you should be able to identify here the motor neuron, the synaptic cleft, the receptors on the muscle fiber, and the ACH going across from the motor neuron, across the synaptic cleft, and binding receptors on the sarcolemma. Anyway, sodium comes in, and that makes the inside of the muscle fiber more positive. Okay, so it's called depolarization, when it gets more positive inside. Okay? That depolarization causes calcium inside to be released. The calcium is stored in cisternae. Remember, that's in large portions of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the other name for endoplasmic reticulum. So the calcium floods out now into the muscle fiber, and it goes and binds to troponin. Troponin changes shape, and it removes the blocking action of tropomyosin. Sometimes troponin and tropomyosin, I abbreviate them as T and T. So calcium moves the TNT away from the actin, and that allows the actin to bind the myosin. So all these steps have to happen before you can get a muscle contraction. Alright, you need ATP for three things in the muscle fiber. It allows the actin and myosin to be primed. So an ATP is bound to the myosin, and as soon as it binds to the actin, that ATP is used. So if there's no ATP there, the actin and myosin won't bind. Second thing, it allows the release of actin from myosin. When you want muscle relaxation, another ATP must bind in order to detach it. In fact, that's why you get rigor mortis when somebody dies, or when an animal dies. There's no ATP, the actin and myosin can't release, and it causes muscle contraction or stiffness. Okay. The third thing you need ATP for is to pump the calcium back into cisternae, back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And of course you want that to happen at muscle relaxation. And you need it there so the next time you get an impulse you can have a second contraction. So the four steps of muscle contraction are: ACH is released from the neuron, from the axon. It binds a receptor on the muscle fiber. That opens sodium channels and the membrane becomes depolarized. The T-tubules help spread that out. That depolarization causes calcium to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, cisternae, into the muscle fiber. The calcium then goes and binds the troponin and tropomyosin, pulling it away and releasing it from the actin. The actin can then bind the myosin, and the myosin will pull and cause contraction. So here's a picture. ACH up in the neuron. Here's the receptor. At the signal, the impulse comes along, ACH is released, it binds the receptors. Okay, and it shows it binding the receptors down here in the corner. Okay, here's another one. Binds the receptors, allows sodium to come in. That causes calcium to be released from the cisternae. Okay, so calcium comes out. And here it is. You can watch the calcium come in. Troponin and tropomyosin. See where the calcium is going to bind to troponin. It's going to go down in there. Moves it out of the way. Calcium comes down, it binds, and it moves it out of the way, and now myosin, those red things, can pull against the actin, which is the little white bead stuff. Okay, it binds, pulls, and contracts. Here's a picture of a sarcomere. At the top, it's pulling the Z lines closer together. Notice the actin and myosin don't change size. They just get closer together. And down at the bottom you can see myosin pulling the actin along as calcium comes in and pulls that troponin out of the way. Here's another still picture. The actin is the red and the myosin is in green. Notice it's thicker because it's the thick filament. And when the myosin reaches up and pulls that actin, it pulls it closer together. And the Z lines in blue get closer together. So stop this PowerPoint presentation and check out the YouTube video. It's just a couple minutes long and it shows this in action. You may want to watch it more than one time. After you're done contracting a muscle, you need to relax it. If you can't relax your diaphragm, you can't breathe. So muscle relaxation is just as important. Okay, and a couple of things you need: acetylcholinesterase, which is an enzyme that removes acetylcholine from the receptors. So it comes along and clips it off, and then actually part of it goes back into the neuron to get recycled. You You need to put the calcium back in the cisternae, and remember you need ATP to pump that back in. And you need to allow the troponin and tropomyosin to move back over the actin so the myosin can't bind. Okay, so the steps of muscle relaxation are basically the opposite of the first 4 steps. Acetylcholinesterase removes ACH from the receptors. The calcium is returned via ATP pumps. Actin and myosin release, and the troponin and tropomyosin get right back in the way, and actin and myosin can't bind, and now you have muscle relaxation. Blocking contraction or blocking relaxation affects us the fastest at the breathing level. We need to contract our diaphragm to take air in. We need to relax it to let air out. So tetanus, for example, causes muscle contraction without relaxation. We die because we can't breathe. We can't let air out. Botulism toxin prevents contraction. It only allows for relaxation, so we can't contract to let air in. We can get air out, but we can't get it in. So again, you die of asphyxiation. So check out your atlas for some pictures. The online textbook has some excellent steps for muscle contraction and relaxation. You can always type it in the web, and don't forget to check out that YouTube video if you didn't stop.